Betrayal is a unique kind of poison, and it's most potent when it's brewed right at the kitchen table, served by the very people who are supposed to have your back when the rest of the world turns away. I have sat across from murderers, imposters, and pathological liars, but there is a specific, heavy silence that falls over a room when a family is tearing itself apart from the inside out. You can feel the air leave the studio. It's thick with resentment, and that is exactly where I found myself when I first looked into the eyes of 24-year-old Sarah, a young woman who had been branded a sociopath by her own parents and a monster by her younger sister. Her crime? She had spent the last 8 months orchestrating an elaborate, heart-wrenching catfish scheme against her own flesh and blood. She didn't just create a fake profile, she created a soulmate for her sister, made her fall in love, and then watched as the inevitable crash shattered her siblings' world. On paper, it looks like pure malice. It looks like the act of a jealous, vindictive person who wanted to destroy happiness she couldn't have for herself. But I've been doing this long enough to know that behavior is a language. When people can't speak their pain, they act it out. And sometimes, the louder the act, the deeper the wound. When Sarah walked onto my stage, the audience was already against her. You could feel the judgment radiating from the seats. She was small, dressed in oversized clothes that seemed designed to help her disappear, shoulders hunched up toward her ears as if she were bracing for a physical blow. She didn't look like a mastermind manipulator. She looked like a frightened child waiting for the principal to expel her. Her sister, Emily, was seated on the other side of the stage, the picture of a grieved perfection, teary-eyed, trembling, clutching a tissue like a lifeline. The narrative was set before I even opened my mouth. Emily was the victim, the innocent princess deceived by the wicked witch. But my job isn't to buy the ticket and enjoy the show. My job is to go backstage and check the wiring. I needed to know why. Why would a sane 24-year-old woman spend hours every night pretending to be a man named Caleb, crafting love letters and future plans for her sister, knowing it was a ticking time bomb? I started where I always do, with the truth of the behavior. I looked Sarah dead in the eye and told her that what she did was cruel. There is no sugarcoating that. You do not toy with someone's heart. You do not manufacture intimacy. And you certainly don't do it to the person sleeping down the hall. I needed her to own the toxicity of the act before we could ever get to the root of it. She admitted it. She didn't fight me. She didn't make excuses. She just said, "I know." And there was a flatness in her voice that set my radar off immediately. Usually, when I confront a scammer, there's deflection. There's a story about how they didn't mean to or how it got out of hand. Sarah didn't offer that. She just absorbed the guilt like a sponge that had been soaking up dirty water her entire life. That was my first clue. This wasn't a game to her. This was a desperate, twisted attempt at connection, or perhaps a way to level a playing field that had been tilted against her since birth. The central problem here wasn't just the catfishing. That was the symptom. The disease was a family dynamic so dysfunctional that deceit became the only currency Sarah felt she had left. As I began to peel back the layers of this story, the monster sister label started to peel away with it. We put up the graphics of the text messages, thousands of them. Caleb was sensitive, listening, attentive, everything Emily said she wanted but never found in her real-life boyfriends. Sarah had created the perfect man. And why was she so good at it? Because she knew her sister. She knew Emily's insecurities, her dreams, her fears. But here is the kicker, and this is what nobody in that room understood until we really dug in. Sarah wasn't just writing what Emily wanted to hear, Sarah was writing what Sarah wanted to say. I turned my attention to the parents, rigid in their seats, arms crossed, faces set in stone, masks of disapproval. They were quick to tell me how perfect Emily was, how she had a bright future, how she was a cheerleader, a social butterfly, the light of their lives. And Sarah? Well, the silence after they said her name was deafening. They described her as difficult, moody, a loner. They told me they had tried everything with her, but she just wasn't like Emily. That phrase, not like Emily, hung in the air between us. It was the refrain of Sarah's entire existence. I asked the father, a stern man who prided himself on discipline, when the last time was that he had a conversation with Sarah that didn't involve correcting her behavior. He couldn't answer. I asked the mother when she last hugged Sarah without Sarah having to ask for it. She looked away. This is where the backstory begins to bleed into the present. You don't wake up one morning and decide to emotionally destroy your sister unless you have been systematically devalued for years. I needed to understand the architecture of this home. Sarah wasn't just the black sheep. She was the invisible ghost haunting a house that only celebrated the living. Through our pre-show interviews and the tapes we reviewed, a pattern emerged that was as clear as day to me, even if the family was blind to it. Emily was the golden child. She could do no wrong. If she failed a test, it was the teacher's fault. If she got a speeding ticket, the cop was unfair. Sarah, on the other hand, was the scapegoat. If Sarah got a B+, she wasn't applying herself. If Sarah was quiet, she was being sullen. If Sarah spoke up, she was being disrespectful. I looked at Sarah and asked her about the creation of Caleb. I wanted to know the mechanics of the lie. She told me that initially it started because she wanted to see if her sister was actually as shallow as she thought. It was a test. A trap? Sarah created a profile using photos of a generic, handsome guy, gave him a tragic backstory and a poetic soul. She sent a friend request to Emily, expecting her to bite because he was good looking. And Emily did. But then something shifted. Sarah told me, with tears finally welling up in those tired eyes, that once the conversation started, it wasn't about tricking Emily anymore. It became the only time Emily ever listened to her. When Sarah spoke as Sarah, Emily rolled her eyes or checked her phone. When Sarah spoke as Caleb, Emily hung on every word. Caleb could give advice that Sarah wasn't allowed to give. Caleb could comfort Emily when she was down, whereas Sarah was usually told to leave Emily alone. This was the escalation point. The lie became a drug. Sarah was addicted to the connection, even though it was fraudulent. She was getting to be the supportive sibling she always wanted to be, but she had to wear a mask to do it. And Emily? She was falling in love with a reflection. She was falling in love with the emotional intelligence of her own sister packaged in the face of a stranger. The tension in the house during those 8 months must have been excruciating. Sarah watching Emily giggle at her phone across the dinner table, knowing she was the one pressing send. The parents praising Emily for finding such a nice young man, validating the fake persona while ignoring the real daughter sitting right there. It was a psychological pressure cooker. Sarah told me about the night it all blew up. She hadn't planned to confess. She didn't want the fantasy to end because in the fantasy, she mattered. But Emily wanted to meet Caleb. She was pushing for a face-to-face. Sarah kept making excuses. Car trouble, sudden illness, work trips. The excuses were running out. Emily was getting suspicious, not that it was Sarah, but that Caleb was cheating or losing interest. The anxiety was eating Sarah alive. She lost weight. She stopped sleeping. She realized she had built a prison she couldn't escape from. The explosion didn't happen because Sarah got caught. It happened because she cracked. She couldn't sustain the duality anymore. She walked into Emily's room one Tuesday night while Emily was crying over a text Caleb hadn't sent, and she simply said, "He's not real, It's me. The fallout was nuclear. The screaming, the throwing of objects, the parents rushing in. But here is the critical piece of information that the parents glossed over, but I latched onto like a bulldog. When the truth came out, the parents didn't ask Sarah why. They didn't ask if she was okay. They didn't wonder what drove her to this. Their immediate reaction was to console Emily and banish Sarah. They kicked her out of the house that very night. A 24-year-old woman put on the street at 2 a.m. because she shattered the golden child's illusion. Sarah had been living on a friend's couch for 3 weeks before coming to the show. The parents hadn't called her once. They were here today not to reconcile, but to vindicate Emily and publicly shame Sarah. They wanted me to be the final judge that sentenced Sarah to emotional life imprisonment. I turned my chair to face the parents, Robert and Linda. They were sitting there with a level of self-righteous indignation that you usually only see in people who are terrified of their own reflection. They had come here expecting me to hand them a pitchfork so they could finish the job of ostracizing their daughter, but they had severely miscalculated who they were dealing with. I looked at Robert, a man who clearly defined his worth by how much control he exerted over his environment. And I asked him a simple question. You kicked your child out of the house at 2 a.m. because she lied? He stiffened, his jaw working. He told me it wasn't just a lie, it was psychological torture. He said Sarah was unsafe to be around. When I pressed him on what he meant by unsafe, he couldn't give me a single instance of physical aggression. He couldn't tell me she stole money. He couldn't tell me she was on drugs. He just kept repeating that she was twisted. Let me get this straight, I said, leaning forward, resting my elbows on my knees. You have a daughter who is clearly screaming for attention, acting out in a way that shows a profound lack of self-worth, and your solution to that crisis is to confirm her worst fear that she is disposable? The studio was silent. Robert tried to interrupt, claiming they had to protect Emily. And there it was again, protect Emily. The entire family system was designed around the preservation of Emily's happiness at the expense of Sarah's existence. I turned to Linda. Mothers are usually the emotional glue of a family, but Linda had hardened herself. She looked at me and said, "Doctor, Phil, you don't understand." Emily was devastated. She was crying on the floor. We couldn't just let Sarah sit there and watch. So you chose one, I said. You picked a team. And I'm telling you right now, that is a failure of leadership in this family. I wasn't there to make friends. I was there to stop the bleeding. I had to show them that while Sarah's actions were inexcusable, they were also inevitable given the environment they had cultivated. I looked back at the big screen where the text messages were still displayed. I asked the producers to pull up a specific exchange, one that I had flagged during my prep time. It was from a Tuesday night, 3 months into the deception. Emily had texted Caleb saying she felt ugly, that she felt like a fraud at school, that she felt pressure to be perfect all the time. Now, pause and think about that. Emily, the golden child, the one who supposedly had it all, was confessing her deepest insecurities. And who was she confessing to? She wasn't telling her parents. She wasn't telling her real friends. She was telling the person she felt safest with. And that person, unknowingly, was her sister. I asked Sarah to read her response, Caleb's response out loud. Sarah's voice shook, barely a whisper as she read from the screen. You don't have to be perfect to be worthy of love. The people who really see you see your heart, not just your grades or your face. You are enough just as you are. I let those words hang in the air. I looked at Emily, who was dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Emily, I said gently, that wasn't a stranger telling you that you were enough. That wasn't some guy in a dorm room 3 states away. That was your sister. Emily looked up, confusion warring with anger on her face. She shook her head, saying it didn't count because it was a lie. The persona was a lie. I corrected her. The name was a lie. The picture was a lie. But the words, the sentiment, that was real. Sarah, did you mean what you wrote? Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face now. Yes, she choked out. I just wanted her to feel better. I wanted her to know she didn't have to be perfect. This was the pivot point. I needed Emily to see that the villain in her story was actually her biggest cheerleader, disguised in a costume because she didn't think she'd be allowed on the field otherwise. Emily, why couldn't you tell Sarah about your insecurities directly? I asked. Emily hesitated. She looked at her mother, then at the floor. Because Sarah is always so gloomy. She hates everything. I didn't think she'd care. Or I challenged, did you think that if you showed weakness to the bad sister, you'd lose your status as the good one? It's a tough concept, but in these polarized families, the roles are rigid. If Emily stops being perfect, the whole dynamic collapses. If Sarah stops being the problem, the parents have to look at themselves. I turned the heat back on to Robert and Linda. You two have created a competition where there are no winners, I told them. You have pitted these girls against each other since they were in diapers. You praise Emily for breathing and you criticize Sarah for existing. And you wonder why Sarah created a fake identity? She created Caleb because Caleb was the only version of herself you people would approve of. Linda gasped, offended. She started to list all the things they had bought for Sarah, the therapy they had paid for. I'm not talking about money. I cut her off. I'm talking about connection. You can buy a kid a pony, but if you don't look them in the eye and tell them you love them, they're going to feel impoverished. I could feel the resistance in the parents. They were digging their heels in. They wanted Sarah fixed, not the family. They wanted me to wave a magic wand, make Sarah apologize, and then let them go back to their comfortable dysfunction. But that's not how we do things. I had to escalate the confrontation to break through that wall. I walked over to Sarah. I stood right next to her, putting a hand on her shoulder. She flinched, not used to a supportive touch. Sarah, I said, looking down at her, I want you to look at your father. Look him in the eye. She was terrified. She slowly lifted her head. I want you to tell him what you told me backstage. Tell him what you were feeling the night you created that profile. Sarah swallowed hard. Her voice was trembling, but she spoke. I just wanted to be part of the conversation, she said to her dad. At dinner, nobody asked me how my day was. If I speak, you tell me to stop mumbling. I wanted to be someone you guys would listen to. Robert looked uncomfortable. He shifted in his seat, crossing and uncrossing his legs. We listen to you, Sarah, he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. No, you don't, I interjected. You correct her. You critique her. You manage her. You don't listen to her. There is a profound difference. I walked back to the center of the stage. Here is the hard truth, I said to the room. Sarah catfished her sister. That is a betrayal of trust. It caused pain. It was a manipulative, desperate act. We own that. But we have to ask ourselves, what is the payoff? Human beings don't do things for no reason. We do things because they work for us in some way. What was the payoff for Sarah? I looked at the audience, then back at the family. The payoff was intimacy. For 8 months, Sarah got to be intimate with her sister. She got to be the hero. She got to be the confident one. She got to experience what it felt like to be valued by Emily. It was a simulation of love, but for a starving person, even a picture of a meal looks good. Emily was quiet now. The anger was fading. replaced by a dawning realization of just how lonely her sister must have been. I saw her look across the stage at Sarah, really look at her. For the first time since the show started, she wasn't seeing a monster anymore. She was seeing a broken mirror. But Linda wasn't having it. So we're just supposed to forget that she humiliated us? Linda snapped. The neighbors are talking. The church is talking. Linda, I said, dropping my voice to that low, serious register that tells people I'm done playing games. You are worried about the neighbors. You are worried about the church. Your daughter is living out of a duffel bag on a stranger's couch because she feels so unloved in your home that she had to invent a man to get a kind word from her sister. If you are worried about what the neighbors think, you are focusing on the wrong thing. You are rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Your family is sinking. I needed to drive this home. I needed to show them the future if they didn't change course. Let me tell you what happens next, I said. If you walk out of here today holding on to this grudge, if you keep Sarah in the role of the villain, you will lose her. Not just geographically. You will lose her soul. She will find someone else to validate her, and it won't be a fake profile. It will be a guy who treats her exactly the way she thinks she deserves to be treated, like garbage. And Emily, you'll go on being the perfect princess, terrified to make a mistake, terrified to be real, because you saw what happened to your sister when she fell from grace. Is that the legacy you want? Is that the family portrait you want to hang on the wall? The silence stretched. It was uncomfortable. It was necessary. I could see the gears turning in Robert's head. He was a proud man, but he wasn't a stupid one. He was beginning to see that his strategy of discipline had backfired spectacularly. He looked at Sarah, really looked at her, huddled in that chair, and for a split second, I saw the mask slip. I saw a father who was scared he had broken something he couldn't fix. Sarah, I said, turning back to her, you have a voice. You used it through Caleb, and you were articulate, kind, and wise. I want you to use that voice right now as yourself. No hiding behind a screen, no fake names. I want you to tell Emily what you need from her to make this right. Not what you think she wants to hear, what you need. Sarah took a deep breath. She wiped her face with her sleeve. She turned to Emily. I need you to stop looking at me like I'm a mistake, she said. Her voice was stronger this time. I need you to be my sister, not just mom and dad's favorite. I need you to defend me sometimes. It was a simple request, but it carried the weight of 20 years of resentment. Emily looked stunned. She had never thought of herself as having the power to defend Sarah. She had always thought she needed protection from Sarah. I saw the shift in Emily's posture. She uncrossed her legs and leaned forward, mirroring Sarah for the first time. It was subtle, but in my line of work, you learn to read the body language before the words ever come out. I didn't know you felt like you needed me to defend you, Emily said, her voice small. I always thought you didn't care what anyone thought. You act like you don't care. That's a defense mechanism, Emily. I interjected gently. When you feel like the world is firing arrows at you, you put on armor. You act tough. You act indifferent. Because if you showed how much it really hurt, you'd never get out of bed in the morning. Sarah has been wearing a suit of armor so heavy, it's crushing her. I turned my attention back to the parents. We were at the tipping point. The escalation phase was peaking, and we were moving into the confrontation that would decide the fate of this family. I couldn't let them sit on the sidelines as observers anymore. They were the architects of this dynamic. Robert, Linda, I said, my voice firm. You're looking at two young women who are trying to bridge a chasm that you dug. Sarah just told her sister she needs an ally. She needs to know she's not alone in that house. What do you need to hear to let Sarah come home? Because let me tell you, leaving her on the street is not a parenting strategy. It's abandonment. Linda bristled. We didn't abandon her. We gave her a timeout to think about what she did. A timeout is for a toddler who throws a toy. I countered sharply. Throwing a 24-year-old out at 2 a.m. with nowhere to go is dangerous. It is reckless. And frankly, it tells me that your love is conditional. You love her when she behaves. You discard her when she doesn't. Is that the message you want to send? That membership in this family is revocable? Robert spoke up then, his voice gruff but less defensive than before. We don't know how to trust her, Dr. Phil. She lied for 8 months, every single day. How do we know she's not lying right now? You don't, I said. Trust is earned. It's built in drops and lost in buckets. Sarah kicked over the bucket. She knows that, but you can't rebuild trust if you're not in the same room. You can't fix a relationship by exiling the person you're having the relationship with. If you want her to be honest, you have to create an environment where the truth is safe to speak. Right now, in your house, the truth is a liability. I looked at Sarah. You have work to do, young lady. You have to prove that you are willing to live authentically. No more games, no more masks. If you are angry, you say you are angry. If you are hurt, you say you are hurt. You don't invent a character to say it for you. Can you commit to that? Yes, Sarah said. And for the first time, she looked at her parents instead of the floor. I can. I want to. And Emily, I turned to the sister. You have a role here too. You have enjoyed the spotlight of being the good one for a long time. It's comfortable. It comes with perks, but it also comes with a cost. It costs you your relationship with your sister. Are you willing to step down from that pedestal and meet Sarah on level ground? Are you willing to admit that maybe, just maybe, you've played a part in isolating her? Emily looked at her parents, then back at Sarah. The victim narrative was dissolving. She was realizing that while she was the victim of the catfishing, she had been a beneficiary of the family dynamic that caused it. I guess I never really tried to understand her, Emily admitted. I just took Mom and Dad's side because it was easier and because I liked being the favorite. I liked that they were proud of me. That is honest, I said. That is a real breakthrough. You like the validation, we all do, but validation that comes at the expense of someone else isn't success, it's dominance. And sisters shouldn't dominate each other, they should support each other. Now came the hardest part. The confrontation wasn't just about air grievances, it was about forcing a behavioral change. I needed a commitment, not just tears. I want to offer you a path forward, I said, but it's not going to be easy. It's going to require everyone on this stage to fire themselves from their current jobs. Robert, Linda, you are fired as the judges and juries of your daughters. Your new job is to be mentors. You need to guide, not govern. Emily, you are fired from being the golden child. You're just a daughter now, same as Sarah. And Sarah, you are fired from being the victim. You don't get to sulk and manipulate anymore. You have to stand up and speak up. I leaned in. I have arranged for family therapy, intensive. Not once a month to chat about the weather. I'm talking about rolling up your sleeves and dissecting this dynamic until you get to the healthy tissue underneath. But I need to know if you are willing to do the work. Robert, Linda, are you willing to let Sarah come home today under a new set of rules, rules that apply to everyone based on respect and communication, not punishment? Robert looked at Linda. They had a silent conversation, a husband and wife realizing they were out of moves. Finally, Robert nodded. We want our family back, he said, his voice cracking slightly. We want both our girls. Okay, I said. That's a start. But Sarah, you are not going back to the same house you left. You are going back to a house that is under construction. There will be dust. There will be noise. It's going to get messy before it gets clean. Are you ready for that? I am, Sarah said. She sat up straighter. The hunch in her shoulders had lessened. Emily? I asked. I want my sister, Emily said, looking directly at Sarah. I want the person who wrote those texts. The real person, not Caleb. She's right there, I pointed to Sarah. She's been there the whole time. You just have to look past the label you slapped on her forehead. This was the moment of breakthrough. The tension in the room broke. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were no hugs yet, no magical erasure of the past 8 months. But the wall had come down. They were looking at each other as human beings, not as roles in a play. The monster was just a hurt girl. The princess was just a lonely girl. The perfect parents were just confused people trying to maintain control. I stood up and walked over to the monitors. This family, I said to the audience, is a classic example of what happens when we stop talking to each other and start talking at each other. When we label our children, we limit them, we tell them who they are before they have a chance to figure it out for themselves. Sarah became a deceiver because she thought it was the only way to be true. That is a paradox that nearly destroyed this family. I turned back to them. I'm going to send you backstage with Dr. Charles Sophie. He's going to set up a plan for immediate reintegration. Tonight, Sarah sleeps in her own bed, but there is a condition. Tonight, at dinner, there are no phones, no distractions, and Robert, Linda, you are going to ask Sarah about her life, and you are going to listen. You are not going to offer advice. You are not going to correct her grammar. You are just going to listen. Can you do that? We can, Linda whispered. She reached out a hand, tentatively, toward Sarah's arm. She didn't quite make contact, but the gesture was there. It was an olive branch. As the cameras pulled back, I felt that familiar mix of exhaustion and hope. We had lanced the boil. The infection was drained. Now the healing could begin. But healing is slow. It scars. This family would never be the same again. They couldn't be. They had seen the machinery behind the curtain, but maybe, just maybe, the family they would build from the wreckage would be stronger, more honest, and more real than the picture-perfect illusion they had been living in before. I looked at Sarah one last time before we went to break. She gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a smile, she wasn't there yet, but it was an acknowledgement. She had been heard. For the first time in her life, the volume of her pain had been matched by the volume of the validation. We cut to commercial, but the work didn't stop. The red lights on the cameras dimmed, and the studio audience began to murmur, a low hum of judgment and curiosity filling the space. But on that stage, the silence was heavy. I didn't walk away. I stayed right there in the pocket with them. This is the part people at home don't see, the raw, unedited awkwardness of a family realizing they have to actually walk the walk. Linda's hand was still hovering near Sarah, trembling slightly. She hadn't touched her daughter yet. The gap between them was only 6 inches, but emotionally, it was the Grand Canyon. Take a breath. I told them, my voice low, just for them. Nobody is filming right now. This is just us. Robert, look at your wife. She's scared. She doesn't know how to bridge this gap. You need to lead here. Robert cleared his throat, shifting in his chair. The authoritarian facade was cracking, revealing the uncertain man underneath. He looked at Sarah, then at Emily. I never thought we'd be here, he admitted. his voice rough. We did everything we thought we were supposed to do. Church every Sunday, good schools, family vacations. Where did we go so wrong? You focused on the resume, not the relationship, I said bluntly. You were building a family that looked good on a Christmas card, but you forgot to check if anyone was actually happy being in the photo. It's a common mistake, Robert, but you can't manage a family like a business. Efficiency isn't the goal. Connection is. I signaled for Dr. Sophie to come out from the wings. He's my medical director, a man who can navigate these turbulent waters with a level of precision that is critical in the outcome phase. This is Dr. Sophie. I introduced him. He's going to go backstage with you right now. He's going to give you a roadmap for tonight, because tonight is the most dangerous time. The adrenaline of the show will wear off, and the old habits, the silence, the judgment, the retreat into corners will try to creep back in. You have to fight that muscle memory. They stood up slowly, like people waking up from a long, bad dream. Sarah stood last. She looked smaller, standing up, vulnerable in her oversized hoodie. Emily hesitated, then did something that surprised me. She didn't wait for her parents. She walked over to Sarah and stood next to her. She didn't hug her, that would have been too much, too soon, but she stood shoulder to shoulder. It was a physical statement of solidarity. We are in this together. As they walked off stage, I watched them go. The parents were in front, the daughters trailing behind. The dynamic hadn't fully flipped yet, but the formation had changed. Sarah wasn't trailing 10 feet back anymore. She was walking beside her sister. That was progress. When we came back from break, I wanted to address the outcome phase, but not in the way people expect. Usually, people want a "where are they now" package tied up with a bow. But real psychology doesn't work on a TV schedule. I turned to the audience. You all saw what just happened, I said. You saw a family on the brink of total collapse. And you might be thinking, okay, Dr. Phil fixed it. They're going home. Everything is going to be fine. Let me tell you something. The hardest work starts the minute they walk out those doors. I walked to the edge of the stage. What we did here today was emergency surgery. We stopped the bleeding. We restarted the heart. But that patient is still in critical condition. Sarah has spent a lifetime feeling invisible. Emily has spent a lifetime feeling the pressure of perfection. Those neural pathways are deep. They are entrenched. One conversation doesn't rewire a brain. I wanted to share a piece of the post-show follow-up we had already arranged because the outcome isn't a destination, it's a trajectory. We had committed to funding 6 months of intensive family therapy for them. Not just once a week, but a comprehensive program that included individual counseling for Sarah to rebuild her self-worth, for Emily to deconstruct her need for external validation, and for Robert and Linda to learn actual parenting skills that didn't involve control and shame. But there was another layer to the outcome that I needed to articulate. It was about the concept of catfishing itself. We often look at the perpetrator as a villain, pure and simple. But in this case, the catfish was a life raft. Sarah created Caleb to save herself from drowning in isolation. If she hadn't done that, I truly fear what the alternative might have been. Self-harm, running away, a total psychotic break, in a twisted way. The lie kept her connected to the family long enough for us to intervene. It was a maladaptive survival strategy, yes, but it was a survival strategy. I looked into the camera. If you are watching this and you see yourself in Sarah, if you feel like the black sheep, the invisible child, the one who can never do anything right, I want you to hear me. You do not have to invent a persona to be worthy of love. You do not have to trick people into caring about you. The problem is not that you are unlovable. The problem is that you are in an environment that doesn't know how to love you. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not to create a fake profile, but to find a new tribe, to find people who see you. And then I pivoted to the parents watching. And if you are a parent sitting at home looking at your kids, and you have one that is the star and one that is the problem, you need to wake up. You are creating a disaster. You are setting your children up for a lifetime of resentment and dysfunction. Go home tonight and hug the child you struggle with. Listen to the child who annoys you, because they are the one who needs you the most. The outcome for Sarah and her family was uncertain, as all human endeavors are. But the trajectory had shifted. They were no longer crashing, they were navigating. I'd received a preliminary update from Dr. Sophie backstage during the commercial. He told me that in the green room, for the first time in years, Linda had cried in front of her daughters. Not angry tears, but tears of grief. She admitted she had failed them. That admission, that vulnerability was the key that unlocked the door. Sarah didn't recoil. She didn't gloat. She handed her mother a tissue. That small act of kindness from the girl who had been kicked out on the street was the most hopeful sign I had seen all day. It showed that Sarah's capacity for empathy hadn't been destroyed by her anger. She still had a heart that wanted to heal, not just hurt. I wrapped up the show with my final thought. We live in a world of filters, avatars, and curated profiles. We are all, to some degree, catfishing the world. We present our best selves and hide our scars. Sarah just took it to an extreme because her reality was too painful to inhabit. Let this be a lesson to all of us. The truth is messy, it's awkward, it's painful, but it is the only thing that is real. And real connection only happens when we drop the act. As the credits rolled, I walked backstage to check on them one last time before they left the studio lot. They were gathering their things. The tension was still there, palpable in the air, but the hostility was gone. It had been replaced by a somber, quiet determination. Robert shook my hand firmly. "Thank you," he said. He didn't say more, but he didn't have to. His grip said he understood the gravity of the second chance he had been given. I looked at Sarah. She was standing by the door, her backpack over one shoulder. She looked tired, bone-tired, but her eyes were clear. "You okay?" I asked her. "I think so," she said. "It's scary." "Going back," "I know," I said. "Change is scary. But the alternative is staying stuck in a miserable past. You've got the tools now, use them, and if they slip up, because they will, you use your voice. You remind them, you hold them accountable." "I will," she said. And then she gave me a small, genuine smile. "Goodbye, Dr. Phil." "So long," I said. I watched them walk out into the California sunshine, a family of four, broken and glued back together, stepping tentatively into a future that was no longer written for them, but by them. The story of the girl who catfished her sister wasn't a crime story. It was a tragedy of disconnection. And while we couldn't erase the 8 months of deception, we had turned the page to a new chapter, one where Caleb didn't exist, but Sarah did. And for the first time, that was enough. As I watched the studio doors close behind them, the silence of the backstage corridor settled in. Usually this is where I disconnect, where I switch gears to the next case, the next crisis. But this one lingered. It wasn't the sensationalism of the catfish headline that stuck with me. It was the universality of the wound. How many Sarahs are out there right now scrolling through feeds, curating digital masks because their analog reality offers them no reflection of their own worth? How many Emilys are performing perfection, terrified that if they miss a step, the love will evaporate? I walked back to my dressing room, unclipped the mic, and sat down for a moment. The outcome isn't just what happens to the guests, it's the ripple effect of the story itself. We had aired a mirror to millions of living rooms. I knew that somewhere a father was watching this and realizing he hadn't looked his difficult child in the eye for months. I knew a sister was realizing she had been complicit in her siblings' isolation. That is the power of this platform. It's not about the spectacle, it's about the insight. The producers had told me earlier that social media was already lighting up about the segment. People were divided, as they always are. Half were vilifying Sarah, calling her a psychopath, demanding she be locked up. The other half were tearing the parents apart, calling them narcissists. That polarization is easy. It's comfortable. It allows us to point fingers so we don't have to look at our own family systems. But the truth, as we had just uncovered, lived in the gray. It lived in the messy, uncomfortable middle where everyone was guilty and everyone was a victim. I thought about the prognosis for Sarah and her family. I'm a realist. I don't deal in fairy tales. The road ahead for them is going to be brutal. There will be nights when Emily looks at Sarah and only sees Caleb, the liar who broke her heart. There will be dinners where Robert snaps at Sarah out of habit and Sarah shuts down, retreating into her shell. The trust is fragile, like a bone that's been rebroken to be set straight. It will ache when it rains. But the difference now is that they have a diagnosis. They know what the disease is. Before today, they were treating the symptoms, Sarah's moodiness, Emily's anxiety, without ever addressing the infection of favoritism and neglect that was rotting the family tree from the roots up. I remembered a specific moment from the therapy session we taped for the follow-up, a clip we hadn't aired yet but would use for an update show down the line. It was Sarah, 10 minutes after leaving the stage, sitting with Dr. Sophie. She said something that cut right to the bone. She said, "I didn't want to hurt Emily. I just wanted to be loved by her. And as Caleb, I was." That is the tragedy and the hope of this entire saga. The motivation was love, twisted, malformed, misguided love, but love nonetheless. That is something you can work with. If the motivation had been pure malice, I would have told the parents to cut ties and run. But it wasn't. It was a hunger for connection. I grabbed my jacket. The day was done, but the story wasn't. I made a mental note to personally check in on their progress in 2 weeks. Usually, I leave that to the team, but I wanted to make sure Robert and Linda were sticking to the no phones at dinner rule. It seems trivial, a small behavioral fix, but it's the cornerstone of the reconstruction. If you can't look at each other over meatloaf, you can't rebuild a relationship. Walking to my car, I reflected on the final outcome phase, the one that doesn't make the broadcast. It's the internal change in the person who finally dropped the mask. Sarah is no longer the catfish. She is no longer the shadowy figure manipulating emotions from behind a screen. She has stepped into the light. That exposure is terrifying, it burns, but it's the only way to grow. She has shed the skin of Caleb. Now she has to figure out who Sarah is. And that is a journey that will take the rest of her life. For Emily, the outcome is equally profound. She has to learn to live without the constant, perfect affirmation of a fantasy boyfriend. She has to learn that real love is flawed. Real love forgets to text back sometimes. Real love has bad breath and bad moods. She has to trade a perfect illusion for an imperfect sister. It's a downgrade in fantasy, but an upgrade in reality. She gets a real human being who would go to the ends of the earth, even to the depths of deception, just to be close to her. And for Robert and Linda, their outcome is the most critical. They have to mourn the death of their perfect family myth. They have to grieve the fact that they damaged their children. That is a hard pill to swallow for parents who pride themselves on appearances. But if they can swallow it, if they can digest that guilt and turn it into change, they might just become the parents they always pretended to be. The sun was setting over the Paramount lot. Another day, another family pulled back from the edge. It doesn't always work. Sometimes people are too broken, too stubborn, too addicted to their own dysfunction. But today felt different. Today, we stripped away the digital noise and forced 4 people to deal with the analog truth. Sarah isn't a monster. She's a mirror. She showed us what happens when we starve people of attention. They will forage for it in the darkest places. They will invent it if they have to. Her story is a warning shot to every family disconnected by screens and silence. As I started the car, I thought of the final text message Sarah sent to Emily as Caleb right before she confessed. It was a simple, "I love you." At the time, Emily thought it was a lie. Now, she knows it was the truest thing Sarah ever said.